So I'm going to be talking to you this evening about moving from crisis to creativity and great health. And in order to set the stage for the kind of stress I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to take you back in time a little bit. So I'd like you to imagine with me the following scenario. The largest investment company in the country has gone under. Factories are closing their doors. Banks are failing. Foreclosures are common. And some of the biggest businessmen in the country have declared bankruptcy. What year is this? You get two guesses.
2008?
It is actually 1873, the fall of 1873, referred to as the Panic of 1873. Now, what had happened is the Civil War ended, and growth and greed took off at a fast pace, no government regulation, and this appeared to be the result. Now, into this rather chaotic time came a young man, 19 years old, from London, an immigrant, came to New York City. His name was Fred Harvey. Harvey began working in restaurants. He learned the restaurant business in New York, in St. Louis. He also took tickets for the railroad company. And the first transcontinental railroad had been completed, which was great news. The problem for the passengers was that the trains had to stop every 100 miles, and there was no place to eat. So Fred Harvey got the idea that he would open restaurants along the railroad stops, and he opened the first one in St. Louis. And these restaurants came to be known as Harvey houses. Yes. He also decided that he would have young women serve the food. Now, prior to the Civil War, it was always blacks who would serve food. After the Civil War, everybody was packing guns, and so gunfights would break out in restaurants, and he didn't want that to happen. So he decided he would have these young women come, sign a contract for a year so they wouldn't run right off and get married. And they would be put up in dormitories above the restaurants. And these young women were called
Harvey Girls.
Harvey Girls. There grew to be over 100,000 Harvey Girls. And they still have reunions. There are a few of them left. So Fred Harvey not only opened the first restaurant chain in this country, he opened up the first career path for women. This was the only place that women could work and be respectable. The next thing, of course, was that it was recognized there were no places to stay over at night when people got off the trains, except a few sort of cardboard type hotels that, this is where the word flea bag came from, by the way. True. So Harvey, in conjunction with the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe railroads, began building hotels. And the very biggest one was right here in New Mexico. It was at Las Vegas Hot Springs, they called it. This hotel had nearly 300 rooms. It had bowling alleys. It had billiard halls. It had casinos. It had an immense bathing facility. And it had a ballroom that could seat 500 for dinner. So they brought in chefs from London, New York, St. Louis. And of course, in order to bring in the fabulous food they were serving, they had to create refrigerator cars on the trains. So Fred Harvey developed an empire, the first hospitality empire. But he did so at a tremendous cost to himself. He was so stressed, there was no enjoying what he had accomplished. He was anxious, he was depressed, he had insomnia, and he wasn't alone. Apparently, many businessmen were suffering in the same way, so much so that they brought forth a brand new psychiatric diagnosis. It was called neurasthenia, or a disease of modern civilization. Where was modern civilization? It was here. So they called it American nervousness. And then they shortened it to Americanitis. So what Europeans believed was that all you had to do was move here and work, and you would become sick. And the recommended treatment was, first of all, leave the country, go back to Europe, and take to the waters. Go to the spas in Europe. And by the way, leave your family members behind, because they might be part of the stress. The other treatment, the medications that were given, you won't believe this. The medications that were given for Americanitis was strychnine and arsenic.
That will cure it.
I don't know how many people it killed. I do know that Fred Harvey did go back to Europe and go to the spas. It did not help. I don't know whether he took strychnine and arsenic. I do know that he never really recovered a fulfilling life. He was very fragile and ill until he died. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because obviously we live in a time of tremendous stress. 3 out of 4 workers report that their jobs are stressful, and I suspect that many more Americans are more concerned about whether they can keep their jobs, whether they'll get new jobs if they've been laid off, if they can maintain their homes, their mortgages, and health insurance for their families. I've read that 60 to 90% of all symptoms reported to primary care physicians are caused by stress. 60 to 90%. And that stress causes more illness and death than infection. We also know that depression in this country is 10 times higher than it was just 2 generations ago. And we know that 10 million Americans are taking antidepressant medication. Now, I would assert that is far better than strychnine and arsenic. We also know that these medications can be life-saving. But what it tells us is that stress is the latest epidemic, and it's deadly. So what is stress? Stress is the perceived threat to one's physical or emotional well-being, and the sense that there's just nothing one can do about it. The results are inner tension, anxiety, depression, possibly insomnia, an ongoing release of stress hormones in the body, the cortisols. So it's like we're living in crisis mode. It drains our energy, it makes us ill, and it reduces our capacity to be creative and productive. So what is the antidote? The antidote for stress is resilience, what I like to call the human sustainability factor. And what is this resilience? Resilience in psychology is the positive capacity for people to cope with crisis and even catastrophe and be able to come back to homeostasis after the experience. Now, animals do this naturally, instinctively. I've seen fabulous films, so I'll share a couple with you. One is of the ibex in Africa. So the herd is running along, a lioness comes, cuts one out of the herd, fells it. She runs back to bring the cubs back for dinner. The ibex is not mortally wounded, however. So the animal comes to, gets up, does 3 things. Number 1, it resumes the activity it was engaged in, the running, runs a safe distance, it stops, it takes 3 deep breaths, it twitches its flanks, and the trauma is clear. There's another great film of the polar bear in Alaska. And you know, biologists keep track of all of the bears up there. They tag them, and so there's a film of the polar bear running across the ice floes. The helicopter comes, the biologist shoots a stun gun, and the polar bear falls down. Helicopter lands, biologists tend to the bear, jump back in the helicopter, they take off. The bear comes to. Number one, resumes the activity of running, runs a distance, stops, takes 3 deep polar bear breaths, you know, you could hear them. Number 3, twitches its flanks, and the trauma is cleared. Wouldn't it be great if we could get over crises that quickly and easily?
We should try that. Run and twitch.
You'll help her.
Yeah.
Twitch our flanks.
Right. The thing is, we have these 30-million-year-old brains that are highly developed, and our recovery from trauma takes 5 steps. But they're pretty complicated. But I'm going to simplify them for you. The first thing is that in response to trauma, humans go into shock, denial, and disbelief. Shock, denial, and disbelief. Number 2, they then experience anger and outrage, much of which goes inside often and is totally repressed. Number 3, humans then obsess, they ruminate about the event. What could have happened? What could I have done? What should I have done? What should he have done to prevent this awful experience? And, you know, this is a cognitive strategy to try to master a terrible situation. So it's quite natural. But it can last weeks, months, or years. Number 4, we then go into despair and depression and sometimes illness because, remember, the stress hormones have been ongoing and released. The 5th step, and we get here with help. We humans need help with coming back to homeostasis. We need the help of other people. We're social animals. We have to be loved through it. We have to be understood. We have to have someone who bears witness to our pain. So that 5th step, when we get there, that has to do with self-forgiveness and acceptance. And again, we get there because we have help from other people who care about us. Want to welcome my friends here. Thank you for coming. Okay, so resilient people are able to move the energy of crisis and trauma through very quickly. And this is what it's all about. This is why right now there's a lot of talk about energy medicine, energy psychology, because we realize that when we talk about thoughts and emotions, we're talking about energies. And we have to learn to move them through us. Resilient people do this very, very quickly. So let me tell you about how we learned about resilience. For many, many years, there would be people who would come to our offices in New York or wherever they were, and they would come for consultation about something, and then the therapist would take a history and be absolutely, unbelievably blown away by how this person could even be ambulatory, let alone successful and high functioning because of the trauma in their background. We call these people the invulnerables and just kind of went, who knows, you know, how I did that. Well, along came Martin Seligman, a psychologist and professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Martin Seligman is the father, or now the grandfather, of positive psychology. He spent the first 20 years of his career studying depression. And he coined the term learned helplessness because he learned that people can learn to be depressed. If you grow up being told that you're stupid, or you're worthless, or you'll never make anything out of yourself, guess what? You know, you may actually believe that and suffer with that. So after 20 years of studying depression, what do you think happened to Martin Seligman?
Depressed.
He got depressed. And it was his young daughter. She was 5 years old then. Now she's a grown-up psychologist. But she came to him one day and she said, "Daddy, I'm only 5 and I learned to stop whining. You should be able to stop being so grumpy." And he realized that he'd sort of, you know, it was in the lower emotion. So he flipped over his research completely and he began studying resilient people. So these were the folks who came from high-risk populations. They did longitudinal studies. So this research has been going on a long while, and there's been many, many contributors to this field. What they learned when they looked at children who are born into these high-risk populations is that 2/3 of them, by the time they reach 18, are lost to crime, to mental illness, to suicide. 1/3 of these children turn out to be incredibly successful leaders in their chosen field of work, popular, healthy, make money, live a long time. What they also learned, which is important here, is that I was so stunned when I heard this. I was just sure my problems were very, very big all the time. What Martin Seligman taught us is that only 10% of what happens out there, 10% of outside circumstances, are responsible for whether we are depressed or happy. 10%. 50%, as you would guess, is genetic. It's hardwired. But if you're like me and you got the half-empty gene, depression runs in my family, we still get 40% of life. 40% of life to make good choices, to create, you know, fulfilling relationships, and to make our lives the way we want them to be. So I call that the 40% factor. I think it's really important. And I want to share with you a story about 2 women who were not from high-risk populations, but they really demonstrate resilience. Susan Reddick and Patty Quigley were both widowed at 9/11. Their husbands were on one of the planes. They were also both pregnant. Well, Susan and Patty met at a support group. They had their babies. They kept getting together. They were very curious about the killers of their husbands. So they began studying Afghan culture. They pretty quickly lost interest in the men because what they discovered is that there are over 500,000 widows in Afghanistan, over 50,000 in Kabul. And these women have children. They're not allowed to remarry. They're not allowed to work. They're only allowed to beg in the street. And Patty and Susan were so moved that they decided, that they would do something. So what they did is they created a bicycle ride from Ground Zero to Boston. They raised over $25,000. They did not just send this money off to Afghanistan. They started working with a nonprofit on the ground. The 2 of them got on a plane. They went to Afghanistan, and they met with these groups of widows, and they arranged to give small portions of money to all of them so that they could have little small businesses, like have chickens, so that they'd have eggs, so that they could barter and send a child to school. So Susan and Patty are representing what I call the 3 C's, what comes from being able to move that grieving energy through so that you come to that place where you're ready to have compassion. And I think you have to have compassion for yourself in order to get there. Compassion, connection, so you can re-engage with the world, and contribution. And that's what they did. And we all need to pay attention to the ways of helping ourselves to move through these times so that we can have all 3 of those on board, where we're reconnecting and we're making a contribution, like all of you do on a regular basis with this work.
Compassion, contribution, and what else?
Connection. Yeah, connection. Now, I'd like to share with you some ways of having yourself be present enough so that you can have the resilience that when times are rough, that you're moving the energy through. There's a researcher, psychiatrist at Columbia University who not so long ago declared an epidemic of oxygen starvation. Well, I thought that was pretty dramatic at first, but if you think about it, every cell in the body requires oxygen. Every system requires oxygen. And every time we are stressed or upset in some way, we shallow breathe. So I suspect that, you know, what doctors see in their offices when we're stressed out is someone who isn't breathing too well. So there are many, many breathing techniques, but what I'd like to teach you is one really simple one that comes from the Heart Math Institute in the Bay Area. The Heart Math Institute has been researching the nervous system of the heart and the alignment of the heart with the brain for many, many years. There's a great book if you're interested. It's called The Heart Math Solution. But what they found is what the ancients knew. All of the ancient civilizations knew that the heart was really the seat of intelligence, and what they meant by that was a kind of intuitive intelligence, you know, how you use your intuition in connection with your brain. So this is an exercise that comes from Heart Math, and it simply consists of inhaling love into your heart and exhaling fear, tension, whatever is, you know, foremost on your mind. Fear and tension usually does it. So I'd like you to do that with me just for a minute. We're going to just inhale love into your heart. Close your eyes just for a minute as we do this. You're inhaling love into your heart. You're exhaling fear, tension, worry. Again. Now they recommend you do this for 5 minutes. And what I like to do is the first 2 or 3 minutes, just that, exactly that. But in the last several minutes, I like to exhale love out to all other beings. And again, this is in the interest of first clearing some of the negative energy and then allowing yourself to reconnect with all others as you send love out to everyone else. It's kind of a Buddhist sort of a prayer too as well. So, yeah. All right. Again, don't underestimate the power of your breath. I can tell lots of stories about the power of breath. Well, one has to do with a world kickbox champion. He just wiped out everybody year after year after year. This is in Brazil, I think. And when he was asked how he managed to do that, he said, oh, it's all in the breath. And he learned how to control his breath in such a way that he had more power than anyone else. The other thing I'd like to share with you is the idea that instead of counting sheep when you go to bed at night, I would suggest that you count your blessings. How many of you have heard of gratitude work or have a gratitude journal? Yeah. Okay, this too has been proven. Just doing a list, making a list of what you're grateful for once a week has been proven to decrease depression. In students probably, because all this experimenting gets done on students usually in college. But it's proven. So what I do every night, literally, is I put my head on the pillow and I immediately start thinking of what I didn't complete, what I need to do the next morning, and all of those sort of things that gather up. So right then and there, I start talking in my mind about what I'm grateful for. And I just go from one to the other until I am so calm and I can't remember anymore because I go to sleep. So it works. Now, there's one more exercise I'd like to leave you with, but it requires that you stand up. Are you willing to stand up? Okay, now you also have to have a little arm room, because what I need for you to do, and by the way, this comes from the practice of Qigong, which is another energy movement technique, yeah. So imagine you are standing in a cylinder. You're standing in a cylinder. You're going to reach up. I like to do this first thing in the morning. It's a great thing to do first thing in the morning. Okay, you reach up, and you're going to push down all the negative energies. So whatever comes to you, you're pushing down fear, anger, frustration, worry, resentment, worry. Push it all the way down through the body, through and out the bottom into Mother Earth. You're going to do this another time. Pushing the negative energy down through the cylinder, through your body, and pushing it all the way down and out into the earth. You're going to do that one more time on your own, but then we're going to put your arms out. Okay, 3 times for the pushing energy down. Then you're going to put your arms out as though you're grabbing a great big ball. And this is going to be a great big ball of positive energy, like love, generosity, joy, and you're going to bring it right into the very center of your being. And some of you will hug each other. Okay, do this another time now. Arms out. Bring a great big ball of positive energy right into the center of your being. And you'll know exactly what to say when you're doing this each morning or evening. One more time. Place it right in the core. Thank you. All right, you may sit down. And I have one more thing to say to you, and then I'll close. And what I love, and I want to share with you last, is the fact that Albert Einstein agreed with the Rotary motto of service above self. This is what Einstein said. He said, "It is high time for the ideal of success to be replaced by the ideal of service. It is only a life lived for others that is a life worthwhile." So thank you so much for having me. And I don't know if you have any questions or I need to skedaddle. Yes?
Is that Albert Einstein or Albert Schweitzer?
Albert Einstein. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Actually, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
On the way home from work today, I heard a really interesting statistic on the radio where they said the younger generation has basically given up on the American dream. If you work hard, you can be successful. And instead is replacing it with, I will never be rich. How can I better serve my community? What are your thoughts on that sort of direction?
Wow.
That was pretty shocking.
Wow.
It was on 7.
Say that last part again. They're replacing it with
the younger generation, and I believe the statistic was 59%, no longer believe that if they work hard throughout their life, they can actually achieve wealth.
Yeah.
So instead, they're starting to turn inwards and look more into the local area and say, well, if my life can't have meaning through success and achievement of wealth, maybe it can through service, through organizations like Rotary or
Yeah.
just helping out locally.
Yeah, well, I love hearing that. And I know it's true among some young people that I know. And by the way, young people these days for me is anybody below 50. But my youngest daughter's almost 35, and she's a journalist and has a degree from Columbia and is, you know, by most measures is very successful. But there's not a lot of money in there. And she finds herself with a lot of colleagues in the same area, and they're doing much of what you're talking about. So I love that idea, and I hope it is on the increase. I think these smart young people are really looking around at how are we going to renew our society, how are we going to do this together, because they realize we're all in it together.
It's a different kind of wealth.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Definition of success.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love ending on that note. Thank you. Oh. I just want to say to you, I do have 2 of my current books that are here for sale, and I would love for you to take a look. I also have a meditation CD that has two meditations on them. The first one is a rather ancient one, and it's very, very good for sleep and de-stress. So, thanks.
Do it again.